What's up, Tenacity? Welcome to the second installment of our YouTube channel. I'm out on my morning walk and I'm taking a look around and see no one's here, so I figured it's a good chance for me to take you on a quick tour of a college campus because it's right down the street. So let's go. We're gonna go check out Harvard. First stop here behind me is something called Harvard Yard. If you were gonna take a tour during the spring, this would be the first place they would take you to. And obviously when you're choosing colleges, the big things are price of the college and whether you can get a job afterward. But because that's so individualized, we're gonna take you to see a couple of the big things you're thinking about when you're going to college. So housing, whether there's sports there, what's the food like, what's it like when you take classes. So first, let's go see Harvard Yard. Okay, so we're in Harvard Yard. And this section is called the freshman quad. So if you take a look around at all these brick buildings, they're where all the first years or freshmen live. And as you get older at Harvard, they assign you to a house. So your second, third, and fourth years, you live there in the same house the entire time. So the reason I'm telling you this is because depending on what college you go to, you might not live there. You might have one building you live in for 4 years. So the living situation is something you ought to consider. When they give tours of Harvard, they point out the John Harvard statue, and they like to make a big deal about it being the statue of 3 lies. I can tell you the lies if you want, but not in the video. And if you take a look at the statue, this foot is a little bit different color because when you're a student at Harvard, you're supposed to walk by and touch it every time you see it for good luck. But I'm not gonna touch it because there's a virus going around and people have been touching it a lot. And this is kind of crazy because when you're walking in this area, there's usually tons of people just taking a picture of the statue, but it's really empty today, so you get a good look at it. Okay, so behind me is Harvard's main library. It's called Widener Library. It's famous because it has a Gutenberg Bible in it. That's your challenge, Google what the Gutenberg Bible is. But the reason I'm showing you the library isn't because that's the coolest place on campus, but because it's a chance to talk about the academics and research you'll be able to do. So if you went to a school like Harvard, there's tons of different libraries, there's so many resources, and as you get older, you'll have to do research projects in college. And if you went to a school like Harvard, it would be great because you wouldn't even have to leave campus a lot of the time. So again, this is the main one, but if you went this way, there's one called Lamont. If you went that way, there's the law school library. Let's keep on moving. So when you go to college as a student, you get a lot of perks, and that could be free access to events, free access to certain things on campus. And behind me is an art museum at Harvard, which features a bunch of world famous paintings and people when they come to Harvard are always certain to go see. And the reason I'm talking about this is just because when you go to college, there's obviously classes, there's extracurriculars, but make sure you know what else is available on campus. That could be jobs, that could be tours at a museum or anything like that. Okay, so I'm standing on Mass Ave. Got the world famous Hong Kong behind me. And if you look all the way down the street, you can see there's some cars, you might see some people. So we gotta make sure we're socially distancing first and foremost. Not quite as busy and exciting as Boston, but still Cambridge is a city. And depending on where you go to school, it might be in the middle of nowhere, it might be in a city. And you gotta take that into consideration because maybe if you're in a small campus, everyone is connected and inward facing, so all your friends are college students. But if you're in a big urban environment like Boston or Harvard, there are many opportunities in the city that don't really have to do with the college itself. Okay, so behind me is a big brick building, and you'd never guess it by looking at it, but it's one of Harvard's gyms for students to work out at. They have 3 main gyms that you can work at. The one behind me is called the MAC, there's one toward the law school, and then there's one across the river called the MER, where some of you have played tennis before. So we're on our way to the MER, and we'll make a couple of stops before we get there. Real quick is Pinocchio's Pizza, best pizza this side of the river. So if you ever find yourself out here in Cambridge, go to Pinocchio's Pizza. behind me is something called the Harvard Kennedy School, and this is where people who are studying government or political science come to take their classes. It's mostly for graduates, but you can take classes there if you're an undergrad. And the reason I'm talking about this is because when you're applying to college, some departments are really great. So say you know you wanted to do pre-med, or you know you want to study physics. Depending on the college, they have really strong departments in these areas, so you might want to apply to those schools. Harvard is unique because probably every subject they have really strong departments, but just because a school is great in one subject doesn't necessarily mean it's great in every subject, so you should take that into account when you're applying. Okay, so behind me is Harvard Stadium. They play football here in the fall and lacrosse in the spring. And I'm showing you this because obviously we're a tennis program, so we have some athletes watching this. If you want to play sports in college, that's a huge thing to consider. It takes up a ton of time. It sometimes interferes with your studies, so you got to find a balance, which is a good thing. Harvard's Division I, there's Division II and III schools too, so it's different levels depending on what you're looking for competition. Let's keep moving. Okay, so I'm just coming from the Merv Center, and if you look behind me, that might seem familiar. That's the Barron Tennis Center. And one of the reasons Tenacity is a fan of Harvard is because they let us use their space. They're nice enough to do that. And if you ever played tennis in college, most schools have a nice tennis facility that you'll be able to play on, like this one. So obviously Harvard's a big campus, and unfortunately we haven't been able to go into the classrooms yet. But one thing about being a big school is sometimes the classes are actually bigger too. So that's something to consider. If you go to a small college, you might get to know the professor well and have a really close relationship with them. But if you go to a big school, there might be more resources available. You'll get to meet more people, and there's benefits that come from that too. Okay, our last stop today is the dining hall behind us. It's called Annenberg Hall, and we're doing it last because it probably should be last on your priorities list. And schools will give you meal points, and you have a certain amount per semester. Others might make you fend for yourself a little bit more. At Harvard, this is where the freshmen all eat, and then as you get older, you'll go live in those houses that we showed you earlier, and that's typically where students will eat. But again, dining hall is another thing to consider when you're going to college. Alright guys, I think that's it for me. There is a stay-at-home advisory after all, so I gotta get home. Hopefully this was helpful, and ask us any questions if you have them. Hey look, it's Eric's car!